change the light.
So cool.
Either way.
And she
But
texted me.
I will do the intro. Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming to RJ Julia. You are supporting an independent bookstore, which means a lot to us. And we are so excited to have author Peter Abrahams here this evening with us. He is coming from Cape Cod in the summer, so he's that is a sacrifice. He is, as you know, he's an international. I've been dying to say this all day. An international man of mystery.
Wow.
I know.
You got a plaque?
He's an international man of mystery. We know him for his mysteries. We love him for that. We also love him because he loves dogs. He loves kids and all these things that he enjoys writing about. You probably know several of his series. One, I wanted to say some of his novels, the standalones, Lights Out, The Fan. It was filmed by Tony Scott with a cast that included Robert De Niro. I don't know if you knew that. Also Oblivion and End of Story. And it was during the period he wrote these books that Stephen King, another author you may have heard about. I don't know if you've heard this line, but he said of Peter, I lost it.
Just make up something complimentary.
He said of Peter, the best suspense writer in America. I mean, pretty, was that close?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So he has a huge fan in Stephen King. And he's also won several different awards. Sorry, my notes are cool. Several different awards, New York Times bestsellers. He's won an Edgar Allan Poe Award for Reality Check, Best Young Adult Mystery, and an Agatha for Down the Rabbit Hole, Best Young Adult. In addition to all this, of course, he writes books that keep us reading much later than we should into the evening. So
Thank you.
with that, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
Please help me welcome.
All right. Well,
Yes, please.
well, first, thanks for coming. Thanks for having me. I love this bookstore. So we'll start with a digression about Stephen King since that was mentioned. Before the book, so it's good. Things are all going to be longer and more digress tonight. But before The Fan, just after The Fan had come out, I got a call from a friend of mine. I didn't know Stephen King at the time at all. And he said, were you listening to the Red Sox or watching the Red Sox last night? I live in, on Cape Cod, a Red Sox fan. And I said, no. He said, well, there was a rain delay and they had Stephen King in the booth and they asked him what his favorite baseball novel was. And he said, The Fan. That's how I got to know Stephen. Just through out of the blue, not one of these things where you're fishing for help from somebody that it comes. Okay. So speaking of out of the blue, people, so I've written almost 50 books now, probably. I could count them up if I had time, but people always say, where do you get your ideas? And I always tell them out of the blue, which is a very unsatisfactory answer because some of these people want to be writers, or some are writers, or some are just interested in the process, and out of the blue is not very helpful. So before this book tour, I made a real effort to figure out where Mrs. Plansky Goes Rogue came from. To do that, we have to, and I think I've identified one possibility. We have to go way, way back in time to when I was a kid at about 10 years old. I loved reading pirate stories, like Long John Silver, which you probably know, but even obscure ones like Red Pete the Ruthless. So in Red Pete the Ruthless, there's Red Pete, he's a bad pirate. Billy Bones is a good pirate. And then there's the boy, right? You could now write the book yourself, just, knowing those parts. The last scene is on a beach. Red Pete is buried up to his neck in the sand between the high tide line and the low tide line. You see the menace of the situation, surrounded by his treasure. Does it get any better than that? No. You've got Shakespeare and you've got Red Pete the Ruthless. It's not. So when I was around 10, I was in school on a Friday afternoon. The teacher let us write whatever we wanted for a 1 hour period. Like, it didn't have to be fiction, it didn't have to be anything, just write, handwriting for an hour. So because I like to read pirates and adventures, that's what I wrote. Every Friday afternoon, I produced something like that. And I would take it, of all the reams of material that I produced, I can only remember the beginning sentence of one. The archaic telephone jangled shrilly in the murky tropical night, which was followed by 5 or 6 incomprehensible pages about some adventure in the Amazon jungle to which I'd been no closer than the Franklin Park Zoo. But I would take this, my little story home, and my mom, who was a writer, would read it. And she'd say, she had a Socratic method. Okay, the archaic telephone jangled shrilly in the murky tropical night. Is archaic the exact right word here? Well, no, it's just agonizingly close. The exact right word is antiquated, but she would never tell me. Teaching 2 things. 1, you had to have the right word. 2, you had to find it on your own. Then she'd say, okay, jangled shrilly. The phone jangled shrilly. Doesn't jangled mean shrilly? Yes, Mom. So are we going to get rid of adverbs from now on? Yes, Mom. So to this day, very few adverbs. In dialogue, no one in my books ever said belatedly, or said lovingly, or said furiously. How they say it is in what they say. Not just the words, by the way, but sometimes the punctuation too. So she taught me all this stuff when I was a kid, right? So when I went to like high school, I knew how to write sentences. I knew how to put them together. I knew how to make one word do the work of more. I knew words not to use. She hated connecting words. However, nevertheless, to be sure, she said, if sentences should connect through the force of the ideas connected, if you find yourself using a lot of connecting words, your ideas are bad. So she taught me all that. So this is a sort of, I don't want to say sophisticated because that'd be patting my grown up. This is a grown up, in a way, kind of pirate story. But now we're going to do another digression, because my dad lived to be quite old, like 96. He was very sharp till the end. And maybe 10 years, my mom died before I became a writer. So she never knew about this. So, so one day, about 10 years, this would be like maybe 15 years ago, he said to me, did I ever tell you about the day your mom decided that maybe you could be a writer? And I said, no, Dad, what are we waiting for? So okay, I'm now going to sink to the bottom of the pit of self-promotion. I'm going to tell a cute baby story about myself. Well, it's not a baby, it's like a toddler. So I was 4 years old and I was in preschool. And in this preschool, we took a walk every day. But this particular day, it was raining. So we walked inside. But the scenery was imaginary. You see what I'm saying? Like the teacher would say, okay, class, a red light, and we would stomp to a halt. Do you see what I'm we're walking, but inside, but imaginary scenery. Okay, so we came to a puddle. And the teacher said, okay, class, here's a puddle. Coming up, here's a puddle. So all the class, single file, walked around the puddle. Except for me, I walked through the puddle. And the teacher said, what about the puddle? And I said, I've got boots on. So when my mom came to pick me up, the teacher told her that story. And my mom realized she had all the makings. Self-centered, uncooperative, attention-seeking, smartass. These are like the 4 legs on which you build the table of a writing career. The rest is just a little polishing. I had it all, from a very early age. So this is a kind of pirate story, in a way. It begins. We'll go to the explosion. It begins on a tennis court. Mrs. Plansky lives. Okay, we have to talk about Mrs. Plansky. She's a 71-year-old widow. She and her husband Norm were from Rhode Island. from not lots of money or anything like that. She was a paralegal and he was an engineer. And they used to go camping with their little kids, Jack and Nina. And one day in the tent, one morning, Mrs. Plansky was fixing breakfast. She was slicing bread to make sandwiches. And she looked up and she said, "Wouldn't it be great if the knife toasted the bread while you were slicing it?" And Norm, the engineer, sat up in his sleeping bag. 3 years later came the Plansky toaster knife, which was a small hit, but internationally in the kitchen fair business. So he handled the making, the invention, the making of it, and she did everything else. You know, the hiring, the firing, the publicity, the marketing. And one day they were getting nowhere. And then in Oslo at a trade fair, some powerful European kitchen guy bought 50,000 and they were off. So they made this small little pile of money and sold out finally when they were old, moved down to Florida to enjoy their sunshine years. And that's when Norm got one of these fast acting cancers. Maybe you're familiar, not personally, but you haven't had it, but you know people that take them out very quickly and Norm dies. So she's on her own. By the way, and some of this is laid out in the first book in this series, Mrs. Plansky's Revenge, but these are standalone. So it's all the background you need is also in here. So Mrs. Plansky's living alone. She has this family, all of whom are unreliable in one way or another. The most problematic of all is her 98-year-old dad, who either is living in assisted living, but prior to this book, he has been, I guess you would say, kicked out of assisted living for romantic things that were going on that caused consternation. He seemed to have two girlfriends. They were on different floors, and he thought that would be enough to keep them apart. But they were also both named Polly, which was just a setup for disaster. So he's living with her now. She's 71. She has an artificial hip, but she's quite active and she's a tennis player and a pretty good one for her age. And so when the book starts, she's in the doubles final, mixed doubles between the old, she's a member of the New Sunshine Tennis Club and they're playing the Old Sunshine Tennis Club. So this is down in Florida. The Old Sunshine is the old Florida hoity-toity one, dating all the way back to 1989. The New Sunshine, where she plays, is the Arab East one, dating back to 1995. So at Old Sunshine, they wear all whites. At New Sunshine, half whites. They're in the final. They're getting clobbered by this couple. Oh, she's playing with a guy called Kev DiNardo, younger than her, but still old enough to be in the seniors. And they've gone to dinner a few times and maybe something deep below the surface is going on, but absolutely nothing has been acted upon. And they're getting clobbered in this match. And so the first words of the novel, they're on a changeover. You know, in tennis, every 3 games, but you can sit on the bench. And believe me, at a certain age, you do sit on the bench. And especially if it's hot, you drink plenty of water. I know because I play a lot of tennis. I have 2 hip replacements, which actually helped me. I'm playing better now. So they're sitting down. "What's your favorite sports cliche?" said Kev DiNardo. "In general," Mrs. Plansky said, "or possibly useful at the moment." Okay, he offers up some sports cliches that you'll know, like "it ain't over till it's over," "one play at a time," "go down swinging." She doesn't like any of them, but she comes up with something that changes the whole match and turns it around. So instead of being points away from losing, they claw their way back. And the match goes on, and the opponents start to get very frustrated. And of course, when you're frustrated in tennis, your game goes very down because it's a mental game so much. So they end up winning. By that time, you know, it's Florida. The big thunderheads are coming in off the ocean. Thunder, they can hear distant thunder. And just as the match is over, it's starting to rain. Kev has come on his bike. So it's raining. They throw the bike in her car and she drives him home with the 2 trophies banging together in the back seat. But you don't have to take that symbolically. It's just a tiny detail. And they get to his house and she's never been there. And it's one of these hurricane resistant modernistic houses. In the driveway is this Lamborghini, and at the dock is a 50-foot yacht. And they, tied up there, and they get out of the car, thunder is booming now, the rain is coming down in torrents. And as they walk toward the house, she can see the boat, the name on the stern is Lisette. So in my work, if you see a name Lisette on the stern, I mean, it's not there casual. I'll just put it that way. Okay, boom, boom, and then an enormous boom of thunder. And Lisette goes up in flames. There's a huge explosion. Lisette goes up in flames. The lines all burn. Lisette drifts off, burns and burns and burns to nothing, sinks below the surface. The fire department comes, and Kev DiNardo tells them that it was a lightning strike. Mrs. Plansky saw no lightning. That's the beginning. So much later, I'll do it. Can I do a short reading? Or is this been, you feel like battered people? So much later, an investigative journalist whose beat is like the Bahamas, the Caribbean, that area, looks up Mrs. Plansky and tells her, a lot has happened since we started, but we're in the middle of the book, but tells her she wants to take her down to the Bahamas to show her something. And the woman's name is Val, and she pilots a small plane that belongs to the newspaper. So she takes her down to the Bahamas. Now, I love writing about the Bahamas. Mrs. Plansky can do a bit of free diving, by the way. I love writing about free diving. I haven't done much in recent books, but the Bahamas and free diving, huge to me. Can we do another digression on why that is? So a long time ago, like college and shortly after, I worked as a spear fisherman in the Bahamas, which was a pretty good summer job, and afterwards later. So free dive, it's not done with tanks, scuba tanks, right? Because it's illegal in the Bahamas. You'd put on, you'd drop to the bottom and you would wait for fish to come, and I mean, there's no sport there, and it's bad for the ecology. Spearfishing, even free diving, is bad. None of it's good for the ecology. But so it was free diving, which means breath hold, right? So we would work 70 or 80 feet. So you don't go down diagonally. You find the fish like from on the surface, and then you go straight down because you want to minimize. Okay, so my brother and I had this buddy who was insane, and we had a boat. It didn't belong to us, and like we would go to a resort, like somewhere in the Out Islands, and we'd say, just give us a place to live in. Like a lot of these resorts have like shacks in the woods or a full fish camp, and we'll take tourists out to the reef. We'll supply you with all the fish you need, gutted, 50 cents a pound, like some ridiculously low price. And can we just come to happy hour? That was the deal. Because in some of these resorts, happy hour went on till midnight or later. We weren't allowed to stay that late because they saw the damage we could do to the bar bill. And so anyway, I learned two things. We're so far off topic now, it's crazy. I learned two things. One was physical presence in the face of danger, how not to panic in a situation where a lot of people would panic. And one of the reasons is, we're spearfishing, and who else is out there fishing? The sharks are fishing, right? And so we had to learn to identify all the different ones and the behavior and read them when really something genuinely bad could happen. And then you get out, although sometimes we didn't. And they were also, anyway, I'm still alive, but it's been close. And I did drown once. And I was never, I drowned and I somehow was saved. I was never quite as sharp after that happened mentally, because I was probably, my brain was deprived of oxygen. Anyway, that's not the important part, and that's not the important thing I learned. The important thing I learned was to love the wilderness. The surface of the water is not the wilderness. There are all these boats and everything like that. Go down 2 feet, 10, 20, 30, you're in the wilderness right away. And I love the wilderness. Okay, that's a total aside. Do you remember when I was talking about this pilot, the investigative journalist? Okay, taking her to the Bahamas. So there are 2 explosions in the book. There was the first explosion of the yacht, And now we're gonna do the second explosion. This won't take too long, 40 or 50 pages, and everyone brought water, something of IV. Bang. Okay, so Val is piloting, and look, Mrs. Plansky sitting next to her. Bang. A big bang. Underneath or behind or both. Val's hands moved, fast, controlled, without the slightest sign of panic. Mrs. Plansky glanced back. The cabin was on fire. When she turned toward the front, she saw that Val's hands were still on the squared off wheel, still looking uncontrolled and unpanicked, but the wheel itself was no longer attached to anything. Then they were upside down. Even at her best, some years ago, certainly in double digits, when she was pretty good at absorbing information no matter how fast it was coming in, Mrs. Plansky could never have processed what came next, such as the blood rushing into her head and the wind screaming by, and gentle ocean waves where the sky should have been, somehow and maddeningly gentle when all this chaos was going on, and the propeller coming loose and shooting by, so very close, and those dolphins leaping up again, almost landing in what was left of the cockpit, and Val shouting, "Seatbelt," followed by a crashing blue deceleration with no give in it at all, as though water had turned to steel, and then a noisy kind of internal blanking out, not a loss of consciousness exactly, like a boxer getting KO'd, but more an internal disconnection, like the neurons in her brain were suddenly all speaking different languages. And now a waterfall was plunging her down, an ear-splitting waterfall, where the sound was muffled just the same, and she got twisted and pummeled this way and that, and suddenly Val's seat went zooming past, followed by Val, her mouth wide open, air bubbles streaming out, and Mrs. Plansky's hands, operating independently, unfastened her seatbelt with not the slightest difficulty, and she began tumbling, first down, then sideways, and finally up, up, and into the air. She floundered around, swallowing water, choking, gagging, gasping, and at last sucked in a lungful of air, and then another and another. Was she treading water? She seemed to be, but in a wild, frenetic way, like she could launch herself into the air, an impossibility, of course. So she dialed back the water treading, tried to calm herself, tried to take stock. Was she hurt? She didn't feel any pain. Was she bleeding? She glanced around, saw no blood in the water. Facing her was endless ocean, on and on as far as she could see. That couldn't be good. She tried to kick herself just a bit higher to get a better view, but she could only manage an inch or so. Mrs. Plansky craned her neck. Water, water everywhere. No, not good. She got stuck on that thought until a wave, stronger than the rest, slapped her face good and hard and turned her around. And there, not far away, was land, bony colored land with a white sand beach, low scrub, some trees. Plus, over to the right, a stone hut. Also, it was a beautiful day, the kind you see in travel advertising. So that's the second bang. And Red Pete the Ruthless is not buried on that. So kind of a pirate story.
Yeah.
With a 71-year-old retired widow.
That's great.
Well, I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have. It doesn't have to be about this. It can be about the Chet and Bernie series, which some of you might know, or anything you.
Well,
Yes.
so you the earlier books you wrote using your Peter Abrahams, they seem much darker to me because I now at like the first book of yours I read was The Fury of Rachel.
That's my first book, 1980.
Okay, and very dark. I liked it a lot, but it's like so like did you change your name to write these books to make because you knew you were going to go lighter, or like because they're similar but different. I mean, to me.
Well, thank you. That's a really, really good question. They were darker. You know, there's no question about that. I mean, for example, there was Nerve Damage. It's about this sculptor, middle-aged, quite prominent, but he came from a working class background. And in his young high school days, he worked in a terrible kind of plant where he was exposed to asbestos, and now he's got asbestosis and he's dying. Okay, so he's prominent enough that he gets to see his obituary. You know that they're written before, long before, you know, they just plug in the date of death. So actually an obituary writer is not a high pressure job if you're looking for, because you can do it, you know, I'll do a little today and maybe next week. So he gets to see his obituary. and there's a mistake in it. Something that he did not happen in his life, he thinks. And so he starts pulling at that thread. So, and ends up realizing he didn't understand his whole life really. And there's still time to fix before. So it's an amateur sleuth story, but okay, dark. That was the point. I don't know why I went on. You did it perfectly. Do you want to actually? So yes, okay, so here's how we get to Spencer Quinn. One night my wife and I were having dinner, and she said, you should do something with dogs. Now, I'd had dogs in a lot of my earlier work. For example, I think there's a dog called Garth in the book you mentioned. Okay, but they were in trot-on roles, just a chapter or two. You never saw inside them. I never wrote in the first person. All my writing is like, except for Chet and Bernie, is like this, third person close. It's not third person omniscient, which I just think is just too easy peasy, especially for suspense. As soon as it's like in a movie when you sort of have to see the bad guy in a scene, but he can't be revealed, so you just see his feet walking, you know that one? Okay, walk out of the movie as soon as that happens. Don't waste your time on second rate. So, so my wife said you should do something with dogs, and I knew she couldn't have meant what I've already done, and then it hit, so three things hit me at that moment. Because sometimes a lot of work can happen very quickly in this business. And the opposite is also true. None happening for a long while. I knew I wanted to write a book narrated by a dog. I was going to steal the method from Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, where Dr. Watson, the sidekick, tells the story in the first person. And then the most important thing about the Chet and Bernie series, if it works, this narrating dog would not be a talking dog, would not be a human wrapped in a dog suit, would know nothing a dog shouldn't know. Okay, so in less time, okay, we have a house here and then a detached garage, and there's this like, and the cars are under, and then above is the office where I write. So I have like a 15-foot commute. So my wife has just said this. I walk over, I go up to my office, and just to see what this would look like if I wrote this, right? So I wrote what became the first page of Doggone It, the first book in the series. I brought it back to the kitchen. My wife read it. We voted 2-0 that it worked. Not so fast, because if the kids had been home, we could have lost 4-2, and there wouldn't be Chet and Bernie. So I sent it, I wrote it, I sent it to my agent. She was very positive. Then she said, but what you just said, it's much lighter. She started to worry about whether the audience would be there and she said, let's do Spencer Quinn. Well, it was going to be a 2-book deal, right? And okay, I didn't really like it, but 2 books. But Cat on a Hot Tin Roof comes out in April, and that's the 16th. And then marketing people like to have Spencer Quinn on. This is really a Peter Abrams book, but in a lighter mood, which has sort of happened to me as life went along anyway. So maybe I don't want to self-analyze because I'm stupid when it comes to that kind of thing to start with. So, and even the right side, this book I wrote about this PSTD veteran coming home when which is very dark, although it ends and it's kind of hopeful no, is under Spencer Quinn. So does that answer anything?
Yeah.
Anybody did touch on glancingly on what you, because that's the best I can do. Were there others? Yes.
Well, I know you've written from the perspective of a dog very well. Did you have any qualms about writing from the perspective of a woman?
No. See, here's my thing on that. We're members of the same species. And if you believe there's such a thing as the imagination, and I hope every fiction writer does, then it's not a huge leap, right? People have written from the point of view of aliens from outer space, right? And I know women. I mean, I've known I've got 2 daughters, a wife, 4 granddaughters. I mean, I've even played mixed doubles with. So, I think I could make it. Didn't worry me because I believe in the imagination, right? Because otherwise I wouldn't be doing this, right? Because there are 2 parts of the writing thing. there's the technique, there's the technical part, the technique. Well, okay, I'm not patting myself in the back. I have lots of technique, and the reason is I was taught well, tons of grammar. Taking my mother out of the picture, tons of grammar, both in English and Latin. That's like playing scales, right? And then just I've written so many books, right? So I have a lot of technique. But the whole other part is imagination. So some days I'll go up to my office and I'm writing, but I haven't started yet. And I'm just sitting, waiting. Like 5 minutes can go by, nothing is happening. Because I'm waiting for a little, okay, this is going to sound touchy-feely, and I'm the lowest guy in touchy-feely. I'm waiting for a little shift in my mind. It's a physical feeling, and I'm addicted to it, by the way. I admit it. And when that happens, this happens.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's not really under my control. And so I believe in the imagination. I hope that.
So is that shift really when one of the research assistants just poked you on the leg and makes you go for a walk?
No, not, okay, my research assistant in the Chet and Bernie series is a half Bernese, half golden, named Dottie, weighs about 90 pounds. She likes coming over to the office. She doesn't, there are two ways to get in. She only likes the back stairs. She won't do the other. And she likes to go under the desk. So a lot of my writing, she's 90 pounds and sprawls. So a lot of my writing is kind of like this, you know, because it's not totally 100% comfortable. So yeah, but she doesn't, we do the walk later.
I do have a serious question. It's so, a lot of writers don't like to talk about this, but, and I know the new title of the Chet and Bernie coming out, people were saying, is this the end? What is
Oh, no, a farewell to art is
Yes,
the
and so
last one.
people were, if you follow the Chet and Bernie and you saw Farewell to Arfs, you're, getting all verklempt because you didn't know that it was gonna be the end. So we know something else is coming.
Well, it's all written.
Right, you said.
And Kristen, I mean, you're going to publish it?
And
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And this is the end of Mrs. Plansky as well? Or
I don't know on that, but I
Okay.
do,
We're looking back to you.
I do know. Yes, there will be, for sure, there's going to be more Chet and Bernie. Cat in the Hot Tin Roof is finished.
Yeah.
And it just incident, Chet has a Facebook page, and if a good title occurs to you,
Yeah.
and as it did to the reader who did Cat in the Hot Tin Roof, then I take those. But I don't steal. I mean, the person we say who did it, and that person gets a signed copy on pub day. There'll be more Chet and Bernie.
But we don't know about Mrs. Plansky.
I don't know about Mrs. Collins.
Do you have anything in mind for Mrs. Plansky?
I actually do.
Okay.
But I have things in mind for other things too. Okay, I only write one book at a time now. I mean, always. I never wrote 2 books. I can't do that. So, I'm doing one book at a time. I'm a plotter. I plot. So I'm plotting. I have ideas, but I don't think I can there's no way I could ever do them all. So, okay, so these ideas that come, I never hunt for an idea for a whole book. I wait for that to come out of the blue, and I get probably 3 or 4 viable ideas a year. So I don't stress about that at all. Also, I don't get writer's block. I'll knock on wood. And I'll explain why. I was at the Tucson Book Festival a number of years ago, and with 2 other writers, and we're on stools, you know the drill. And someone in the audience said, "What about writer's block?" And the 2 other writers bemoaned, "Oh, it's so horrible." And I said, "I don't get it." And they all looked at me, and I said, whenever I get the feeling that I'm headed for a roadblock, I step back and I remember the beating heart of the story, the spirit of the book, what the engine that's driving it. Now, for some writers, that's not going to be good because those things are missing. It's a shell is really what they're writing with no engine, but never mind that. So I said, I step back. And for example, in the case of the Chet and Bernie mysteries, the engine that drives it is the love between Chet and Bernie. If I step back and remember that, the next scene has to in some way show that. That's it. Here's a cheap trick. If because that sounded too metaphysical. Here's a cheap trick. Sometimes at the end of the writing day, I'll stop in the middle of a sentence. Because what's easier than the next day you come in, you're in the middle of a sentence, and off you go. Well, thank you all. Yes.
I just have a process question. Do you clearly type because you're making this motion, but did you ever write your books by hand or have you always?
No, always type.
You've always
But
typed.
I'm a really, really poor typer. I mean, I was never taught properly. Okay, you'll see that this finger is kind of bent. I'm left-handed. This finger probably does 75%. And is just like, what is it when workers sue because, you know, because they can't work anymore, they get some kind of protection from the government. This finger could do that.
And do you know how a book will end when you're writing?
That's a great question too. I know that it's resolvable, that I have at least one resolvable that's fair to the reader, but I don't know exactly. I'm very, okay, I shouldn't say this. I'm pleased with how this one ended, the very last one. See this little character down for. He threatened to walk away with the book. Oh, there are characters like that they step in and they want the limelight. And you have to really, you know, you got to reel them in.
You have intimated in one of your Chet and Bernie books that Bernie thinks about Chet dying. And of course, Chet doesn't think about that. Like, he thinks about his mortality, right? So I guess I'm curious, like, if that, you know, do you think of, no.
Yeah, don't go there. Okay. Here's a very mercantile reason. Chet is the narrator of an ongoing series.
Can't have it.
Yeah. Why? Okay, I'm not averse to provoking a tearful reaction from the reader, but I don't want cheap tears. And killing the dog, it's a classic cheap tear thing. I'm just not gonna do it. So don't worry on that.
Okay.
But you're not the first, because I think somewhere in the series, Chet was biopsied with some little thing.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I'm going to do a shaggy dog thing here and not have the results of the biopsy come in till the next book. You know, clever. Okay, I began getting these emails all in caps. It's not gonna happen.